Welcome to this retreat as we begin Advent, and I'm really happy to be here together with you. My name is Father Timothy Gallagher. I'm an Oblate of the Virgin Mary, and I spent 30 years in our Oblate communities in Boston. And this is a memory from my years at St. Clement's Eucharistic Shrine. I was provincial at the time for our United States province, and when I was elected provincial, suddenly I was faced with an array of legal and financial issues that I'd never dealt with before. My background is in spiritual theology. And with some effort and a bit of God's grace, I was able to get the part-time help of Sister Gertrude. She was in her late 60s at the time, and this would prove to be her final active ministry. She'd spent her life, a long, faithful religious life, working in these kinds of administrative things out of the business background that she had before she entered religious life. And she was a godsend. Our working relationship was really quite simple. I would bring an issue to her, she would review it, she would come back to me and say, if I were you, this is what I would do, and I'd say, that's what we'll do, and it would always work out. What I'm remembering is one day when I walked across the corridor of offices to her office, and I was standing in the doorway. She was seated at her desk, and we discussed whatever business matter brought me over there. And then at a certain point in the conversation, she looked up at me, and with a smile she said, "Imagine, I am just now beginning to understand the vows," by which she meant the vows she had professed as a religious so many years before. I don't think I showed a reaction at the time, but I was deeply struck by that. And I found myself thinking about it because if someone had asked me about my own religious vows, which I had professed some 25 years earlier, I would have said, well, I think I understand them. I think I know what they're about. And it might be that many of us would say the same about our marriage vows or whatever vocation to which the Lord has called us. And something clicked in my heart that day. I said, I want to live that way. I want to live with the freshness and the newness of a continually beginning in my spiritual life, in my case, my priesthood and my religious life. There's something beautiful about that in the sense that you're never old, you're never tired, you're never weary or just, sort of everything's over and there's nothing new. It's the opposite way to live. And after that experience, I began noticing in many of the different saints that you'd see exactly the same thing. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who is on his way to Rome, this man who is 73 years old, grown elderly and venerable as a bishop and a holy man of God, and is on his way to what he knows will be a martyrdom in Rome, writes to the Ephesians in one of these letters, these marvelous letters that he wrote along the way on the journey, and says, I am just now beginning to be a disciple. Imagine, I am just now beginning to be a disciple. St. Francis of Assisi, as we read in one of the early biographies of his life, in the last months of his life, in that final illness, already constrained to keep to his bed, unable to move. And as the brothers gather around him, from his pallet, he looks up at them and he says, let us begin, brothers, for until now we have made little progress. And the biographer comments that always hoping to make a new beginning, he always strove to make new progress. I'll quote just a few lines from St. Francis de Sales, who says this, "It is right that you should begin again every day." Let's hear that again. It is right that you should begin again every day. There is no better way to complete the spiritual life than to be ever beginning it over again. Maybe one last memory along these lines. This was in 1995, and it was an article in the Boston Globe. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was coming to Boston to visit, and on her way to Boston, she made a brief stop in New Bedford, where her sisters were working. And while there, she met the mayor of New Bedford. And the next day in the Globe, the mayor was quoted as saying this about her meeting with Mother Teresa. She is the youngest 84-year-old I have ever met. Now that's living the spiritual life with always with freshness, with newness, with a new beginning. And I cite all of this because that's exactly what Advent is in the Church's spiritual year. It's a new beginning. The Church's calendar, liturgical calendar, begins not with January 1st, but with the first Sunday of Advent. The whole liturgical cycle begins. There's a new infusion of energy, a new start. For 20 years when I was in Boston, I had as a spiritual director a really wonderful Jesuit, Father Ed O'Flaherty, and I'll be forever grateful to him. He died some years ago, certainly is with the Lord, a man I really grew to love. And I remember in one meeting with him, I was talking about this theme, and I said to him, I feel like I'm just beginning to understand things that I've always accepted. And he said, yeah, that's the way all the great figures in the spiritual life always live the spiritual life. So are you married? Begin again today, like it was the first day. Are you living the single condition and loving and serving the Lord in that condition? Begin again today. Are you a priest or religious? Are you in these circumstances of health in the work world, in this situation, these relationships, this family situation? Begin again. Let Advent be a time to begin again with all the freshness and energy and the joy that comes from living our spiritual life in that way. Oh, so many memories come to mind. I'll mention this too. He too now is with the Lord. This was a Jesuit, wonderful Jesuit priest, Father Ralph Drendel. And I travel a lot for retreats, and I actually met him several times in retreat houses and seminaries where he would be giving retreats or working with seminarians. And I always remember you'd go by his room, the door was open, and you'd see him at his desk writing, this man in his 80s. And one time I asked him, well, don't you have your talks down at this point? He said, no, I always tear them up and I always do them fresh each time. And there was a youthfulness about him. He drew young people to him. His door was open, but there was always somebody with him. So that's Advent. And I'll conclude with this. My own founder, Venerable Bruno Lanteri, inculcated this theme over and over and over to his spiritual directees. And at this point, a married woman had asked him for spiritual guidance, and he drew up a spiritual program for her. So it reads in her voice. He's writing in her voice as he says this. And he says to this woman, and if I may say so to us today, if I should fall 1,000 times a day, so I fell into impatience again, I got angry, I was more selfish than I should have been, I missed that opportunity to reach out to this person with a helping hand or a listening ear, or whatever the fault might be, my prayer slipped again and so forth. If I should fall 1,000 times a day, what's my response going to be? And you can already see where this is going. If I should fall 1,000 times a day, 1,000 times a day I will begin again. With new awareness, yes, of my weakness, promising God, and with a peaceful heart. So this sort of self-flagellation and anger at self and being heavy on ourselves and so forth because we failed, no. Promising God with a peaceful heart. God never wants that kind of heaviness. With a peaceful heart to amend my life. I will never think of God as if he were of our condition, and grows weary of our wavering, weakness, and negligence. Another striking thing. Here is a person who is always late and does it again. We get tired of it pretty quickly. Here is a person who says that he or she will have her part of the project done, and we know it's not going to be done on time. Here is a person who wavers and hesitates and just can't make a decision. And we get tired of that pretty quickly. And what Venerable Bruno is saying is that we tend to think that God is like that with us. When I fall 1,000 times and I just keep falling into the same errors and faults and even sinfulness, we tend to think that God just gets weary of it, gets tired of it. And so what Venerable Bruno says is, don't ever think of God that way. Rather, I will think of what is truly characteristic of him, what he prizes most highly, that is, his goodness and mercy, knowing that he is a loving Father. Venerable Bruno's own father and later his spiritual father were very loving. His only understanding of fatherhood is something warm and safe and sure and loving. Knowing that he is a loving Father who understands our weakness, is patient with us, and forgives us. If I should fall 1,000 times, if I've lived 20, 30, 40 years of my vocation to marriage or whatever it is, let me begin again with all the joy and hope and freshness. And may God grant that Advent this year be that kind of new beginning for us. God bless you.